It's day 92 and 93 of the 100 Days of Making Comics, and the last 2 days I've been spending time doing writing for chapter 5 of Quarterly Stories. So let me explain what the 100 Days of Making Comics is. It's where you're supposed to spend 30 minutes a day for 100 consecutive days working on your own personal comic project. I'm working on a comic book called Quarterly Stories, and that's a story about faith, mental illness. It's a very personal story to me that I handwrite, hand letter, hand ink, and then hand to you, hopefully someday in print. But until then, it's available serialized at quarterlystories.com. And it's also available on Tapas.io, and you can search for it on the Tapas app as Quarterly Stories and add it to your library there if you're so inclined. So I've basically wrapped up the chapter, which is really cool. And now I'm going through the hard process of really drafting out the first draft for the next chapter, which is actually kind of a tough one because I know plot-wise on my story arc, I want this to be a more lighthearted childhood story, and yet there are certain thematic points that I'd like it to address, but a lot of this process, because it's so free for this specific chapter, is going to take a while because it requires a lot of junk writing that may actually get thrown away, may stick around, and it's all in the first draft stage. So I'll show you my progress for the last 2 days on it. And the first day I actually wrote some stuff that I wasn't too happy with. The next day, today, I actually thought it would be good to kind of do the story of meeting one of my childhood best friends. And I think that can kind of relate because at the time I was going to a Christian school and got really disillusioned with Christians, and this was like 5th grade, but at the time I think that's kind of how I lost my faith, was like sort of starting with that point and kind of going on and being confronted with a lot of hypocrisy. And so for those of you who don't know, this story, this comic, is actually kind of a testimony, which I know is kind of weird for those of you who aren't believers or anything like that, but it's going to be basically explaining how I kind of found my way to having faith. But in order to do that, it also has to kind of get into how I lost my faith and ended up in the situation that you know, after 10 or so years of having no faith, I ended up in, which is how the story starts. So it kind of starts on a down point of when I was at one of my lowest points, and gets into some of the mental illness that, you know, I suffered from and stuff like that around that time, and also just kind of touches on mental illness in general because I feel like that topic's not talked about enough. But then hopefully is going to head into the area of sort of what I view as redemption, which is not going to be like an end-all, cure-all kind of way of writing, because, you know, a lot of issues and stuff like that have not just disappeared magically from my life, but my life really has a different purpose, and it's something that it's just really interesting. It's an interesting area of my life to mine from, since I'm drawn to autobiographical narrative in comics. And so anyhow, so that gives you a little bit of where I'm coming from for this chapter. So basically, since we're coming from a really heavy topic of panic attacks and stuff like that on the chapter before, I thought it would be important to kind of lighten the mood, but also still seed the story of this kind of faith conflict that's sort of a subplot that's going to be kind of woven throughout this long story. And that'll probably be the end point of the first book, is this chapter that I'm writing right now. So I also want it to end on a way that's not a total down note, but it's probably not going to end in the most like hopeful way, because it's ending kind of mid arc. So basically we have the rising action. At this point it's going to be a brief respite, which is actually what I'm calling it, but the plot point on it is going to be a brief respite so that it gives you a little break from the heaviness, and then it's going to get to the climax. But the next book after this book, whenever I'm done with it, which might be a year from now, with the pace that comics take, will be the conflict. So basically, well, actually it'll be kind of the resolution, sorry, because the conflict's already been presented, but hopefully this will kind of reinforce, like this part that I'm writing right now will reinforce the conflict and the rising action but at the same time allow the reader a little bit of a break from the heavy subject matter so they don't feel like super bummed out, because I feel like a more lighthearted approach would be best. So that's some of the stuff I'm thinking about while writing. Let me show you the progress. There's not really a lot to show you. It's just junk writing that I'm doing, and hopefully it won't take long. But at the same time, writing takes a while, and then when I'm done with this first draft, I'm going to need to have somebody who I trust kind of look it over and revise it, and then I'm going to try to kind of rough it out. I think in the case of this, it might be, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me just show you guys what I'm working on right now. So yeah, it's not a lot, but you can see, you know, kind of where I'm at so far in the story, and that's pretty much where I'm at. So I'll keep writing and hopefully get more progress tomorrow. Okay, so that's pretty much all I can show. I know this is like the least fun part to kind of see in the 100 Days of Making Comics, but I thought it would be important to kind of document it. And it's interesting because I didn't even think I'd be getting this far by this point in the challenge, because these comics take me a long time to kind of execute. The writing in perspective probably takes maybe about a week, so hopefully I'll be done with at least the first draft of this, and maybe even the revised and finished draft by the time this challenge is complete. But the writing part is actually a part I don't really talk about a lot, or haven't on the vlogs, because most of these scripts are like pre-written before I get into the nitty-gritty of actually creating the comics. And the scripts are actually part of what drew me to comics in the first place, because I'm not somebody who just wants to draw comics. I want to be an author, illustrator, and so that's kind of the complexity of this work and why it takes so long, because I really care about it. And I care about the result, and I care that it's good and entertaining to the reader, which is why I do the revision and the junk writing and all of that. And so right now I'm in that mysterious process of trying to kind of like, I have my plot points, I know where I'm at on the arc of my story, I know where it's going to conclude, but I really patiently have to execute it in a way that will be hopefully entertaining, well written, and interesting for the reader. And so this is like really fun. It's a part of my brain that kind of honestly shuts off a little bit while I'm doing the execution stage, because I'm just thinking about the design and the draftsmanship and stuff like that. But I really love the writing stage, and I'm really excited about it, and I'm actually hoping that I end up in a territory that's good. And I know, unfortunately from experience, that just means attacking it on a daily basis. So this challenge, the 100 Days of Making Comics challenge, is going to be a really good way to keep me at it. And hopefully, I'm hoping, you know, within the next 7 days, I'll at least have a really good, solid draft. But for those of you who like watching my art process and stuff like that, hopefully you'll stick around for these videos till the end of the challenge of me just kind of working on the writing process, which is a long process for me. Although it's honestly one of my favorites, since, like I said, with comics I haven't been as interested in executing other people's ideas as much as my own. And so this writing part is a really fun, enjoyable part of the process. So for those of you who are taking on the 100 Days of Making Comics challenge and writing and working on your own stuff, I'd like to hear kind of your writing process. Do you guys pre-write like an entire script before? How do you approach it? Like for me, doing it in this incremental way, where it's like I write before each chapter, gives me this nice little respite, which is kind of a call out to what this chapter will be, but it's like a nice little break from all the execution stuff, and gets my my brain thinking creatively, but in a different way than what I'm used to doing for pretty much the majority of the year. Because by the time I've written out like 4 or 5 pages, that's, you know, that's half a year. I mean, it's, well, maybe not half a year, but it's going to take like 2 to 3 times as long to execute the art as it does to just write it out. And so anyhow, I'm rambling and it's getting kind of late, but that's what I've been up to for the last 2 days. So day 93, which is today, and day 92, yesterday, are complete, and hopefully I can stay at this like for 30 minutes a day. Thanks to those of you who've liked, shared, commented, and subscribed to these videos. It means a lot, and I hope you guys are having equal success on your own personal projects. Alright, I will talk to you guys tomorrow.